All right, let's travel to ancient Egypt today, specifically to, well, a truly staggering site, the Karnak Temple complex.
It really is staggering. What we're exploring today, based on the material you've pulled together, it isn't just, a single temple.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's this vast network, temples, chapels, huge halls, these massive gateways called pylons, all covering what, over 100 hectares?
Well over. It makes it the second largest religious complex anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And that scale is, it's genuinely hard to grasp until you're actually there. The main area, the precinct of Amun-Ra, is so incredibly big you could comfortably slot in 10 great European cathedrals inside its walls.
10 cathedrals. That really puts it in perspective. It says so much about the sheer resources, the ambition poured into this one place over centuries.
Millennia, even. And the history is just as immense as the scale. Construction started way, way back, Middle Kingdom, around 1970 BC with Sinister South.
Okay, so nearly 4,000 years ago.
Exactly. But it wasn't a quick build. It just kept growing, evolving for over 2,000 years, right into the Ptolemaic period.
So you've got something like 30 different pharaohs, each one adding their own piece, maybe changing things, leaving their mark.
It's like reading layers of rock, but it's history carved in stone. The ancient Egyptians themselves knew how special it was. They called it epicenter,
Ipet Isut, and that means,
the most selected of places.
okay, powerful name. So using these sources, let's say, our aim here is to really explore this incredible site, understand what made it so important, so central for so long.
Right. And when we say Karnak, it's good to remember it's not monolithic. It's a complex, really four main parts.
4 parts.
Yeah, there's the precinct of Amun-Ra, the huge one that most visitors see. Then the Temple of Mut, you need a different ticket for that one. The precinct of Montu, and a smaller temple of Amenhotep IV.
Okay, so let's focus on that main precinct of Amun-Ra. Entering that must be quite the experience.
It really sets the scene. You first cross what looks like a dry moat now, but back then, that was a dock, an actual harbor connected to the Nile.
So sacred boats, processions arriving right at the temple entrance.
Exactly. Connecting the divine world directly with the lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile.
And once you're past that, you're on the processional way.
And it's lined with these incredible ram-headed sphinxes, hundreds of them. The ram, of course, being the sacred animal of Amun.
Amazing. And this wasn't just the entrance path, was it? Didn't it go further?
Oh, much further. This pathway, this processional way, originally stretched almost 2 miles south. It formed a grand avenue of sphinxes linking Karnak all the way to Luxor Temple.
2 miles of sphinxes. Just imagine that procession, maybe for a major festival.
Incredible image, isn't it? And then right ahead, the scale just hits you. The first pylon, this massive monumental gateway, the towers soar 43 meters high.
43 meters. That's huge.
It is, and if you look closely, you'll notice the northern tower wasn't quite finished, even incomplete. It's the largest single pylon in all of Egypt.
Wow. It really underscores the sheer ambition, maybe sometimes outstripping even a pharaoh's lifetime.
Absolutely, that tells a story right there.
So beyond this giant gateway, you enter the forecourt.
Right, and even in this first open area, you see layers of history right away. There's a single column still standing there, a papyrus-shaped pillar. It's from the kiosk of Daharka, a much later pharaoh, a remnant sticking out from an earlier space.
Always these layers. Okay, moving deeper into the Amun-Ra precinct, what other major structures do we encounter?
Well, one significant one is the Temple of Ramesses III. It's basically a complete smaller temple built right inside the main complex.
A temple within a temple.
Sort of, yeah. It has its own entrance pylon, guarded by colossal statues. Inside, there's a court where the actual pillars incorporate huge statues of the king. They're part of the structure.
Integrated statues, that's interesting.
Very. And the walls are covered in carvings, showing the annual Op festival processions, rituals. It gives you a visual narrative of what happened here. Oh, and there's also a huge pink granite statue of Ramesses II nearby. Different Ramesses, same spot.
Always adding layers. Then you get to the second pylon.
Correct. This one was started by Horemheb, then completed by Seti the Ancient. And if you look inside the actual doorway, you can find their cartouches, those oval rings with the king's name inscribed.
Ah, the royal signatures.
Exactly. You see Horemheb, Seti II, even Ramesses II. It's like a guest book signed by pharaohs, showing the succession, each building on the last.
And past the second pylon. This is where we find the most famous part, right? The great hypostyle hall.
Absolutely. I mean, words struggle to do it justice. The scale is just breathtaking.
It covers 5,500 square meters, the sources say. That's enormous. It sounds less like a hall and more like a forest.
That's the perfect description. A forest of stone. 134 colossal sandstone columns packed into that space.
134, wow.
And they're not uniform. Most of them, 122, are about 12 meters tall. But the central dozen, along the main axis, tower up to 21 meters.
So much taller in the middle. Why the difference?
Well, they're shaped like papyrus plants. Some like closed buds, others like open flowers. The taller central columns created a central nave, mimicking a papyrus marsh, which for the Egyptians symbolized the primeval swamp of creation. The whole temple was a kind of microcosm of the universe.
A symbolic landscape in stone. And originally, these weren't just plain stone, were they?
Not at all. Imagine that forest, but painted in brilliant, vibrant colors. Columns, ceiling, everything. You can actually still see faint traces of paint high up on some columns today. Gives you just a tiny glimpse of how visually overwhelming it must have been.
Incredible. How did they even light such a vast, dense space?
Very cleverly, they used something called clerestory lighting. Because the roof over the central nave was higher than the side aisles, they could put large stone grills, windows essentially, high up in those walls, about 24 meters off the floor.
Ah, so light came in from above, down the main aisle.
Precisely. It would have dramatically illuminated the central path, leaving the side aisles comparatively darker, adding to the mystery and sanctity of the space.
Oh.
Really sophisticated design.
And holding up that roof, these massive beams, the architraves.
Huge stone lintels, yeah, stretching between the columns. Some were up to 7 meters long themselves, and they had to support roofing slabs that could be 9 meters long. Monumental engineering. Often needed multiple blocks just for one lintel.
And decorated too, I assume?
Of course. Every surface was an opportunity for carving.
The construction itself took a while, didn't it? Spanning generations.
It did. Amenhotep III seems to have started it. His grandson, Seti I, largely completed the structure. And then Seti's son, Ramesses II, Ramses the Great, did a huge amount of the decoration.
Right. Ramesses II is everywhere at Karnak, it seems.
He certainly left his mark.
Yeah.
And the decoration in the hypostyle hall is just everywhere. Walls, columns, the undersides of those architraves, it's completely covered in reliefs and hieroglyphs.
So it's like a library of images and text.
Exactly. And because different pharaohs worked on it over time, you get this fascinating mix of artistic styles and themes reflecting their different reigns and priorities.
What kinds of things do the carvings show?
All sorts. Religious rituals, processions, gods interacting with the pharaoh. But also, importantly, historical events. You find battle scenes. Seti I's campaigns are on the north wall. Ramesses II's on the south exterior wall.
Real history mixed with religion.
Yes. And near the south gate, Ramesses II even had his famous peace treaty with the Hittite Empire carved in stone, the earliest known international treaty.
Wow. That's preserved there.
A copy of it, yes. But what's also really interesting is when you look closely, you can sometimes see where later pharaohs literally carved over the names or images of earlier ones.
Rewriting history directly on the walls.
Precisely. Enhancing their own legacy by diminishing or erasing a predecessor. Politics in stone.
And you mentioned access was restricted. Not everyone could just wander into this amazing hall.
Definitely not. The further you went into the temple complex, especially to the hypostyle hall and beyond, the more restricted access became. This wasn't a public square, it was sacred space, increasingly limited to the priests and the royal family as you near the innermost sanctuary.
Makes sense. Now, thinking about construction methods, the sources mention something called talatat blocks, introduced by Akhenaten.
Ah, yes, the talatat. That's a fascinating detour. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who tried to shift worship solely to the sun disk, Aten, he needed to build his new temples quickly.
Right, including some at Karnak itself, like the Gempa Aten.
Exactly. So his builders used these smaller, standardized sandstone blocks, roughly, 50 by 25 by 25 centimeters? Kind of like ancient Lego bricks. Much easier and faster to handle and build with than the huge blocks used before and after him.
But his revolution didn't last.
No. After his death, his religious changes were reversed, and his temples were systematically torn down. And guess what happened to all those convenient talatat blocks?
Reused.
Tens of thousands of them. They were used as filler material, hidden away inside the massive pylons built by later pharaohs, especially the 2nd, 9th, and 10th pylons at Karnak. It's like finding the remnants of a rejected architectural phase buried within the monuments of those who erased it.
Incredible. Okay, moving away from the main buildings for a moment, what about the sacred lake? That's a common feature, right?
Very common in temple precincts. At Karnak's Umland precinct, there's a large artificial rectangular lake. It had practical uses water for rituals, maybe construction, but mainly cultic ones. Priests perform purification rites there before entering the temple.
Purification. Makes sense. Any other details about it?
Well, there was apparently a building nearby that housed sacred geese associated with Amun. And over at the Mood Precinct, the lake is different. It's huge and horseshoe-shaped, possibly an old branch of the Nile itself. Tomb paintings actually show sacred boats sailing on that lake during festivals.
And there was another interesting find. A catacomb. But not for animal.
That's right. In the Osiris complex area, it's been reinvestigated. These are underground galleries, vaulted ceilings. But the walls are lined with hundreds of small niches.
Not for mummies.
No. Apparently for placing small votive figures of the god Osiris. It strongly connects that part of Karnak to the underworld, to themes of death and rebirth central to Osiris.
Fascinating. Looking back at the architecture, we see other elements besides columns, right? Like peristyle courts.
Yes, those are courtyards surrounded by a colonnade, columns. A good example is the court of Thutmose IV, which has actually been reconstructed in the open-air museum at Karnak. You also see pillars, square or rectangular supports, sometimes doing the same job as columns.
Like in the Ramesses III temple court you mentioned, where they had statues carved into them.
Exactly. And just clarifying terms, when we talk columns, there's the main shaft, the abacus block on top supporting the beam, and the base at the bottom. Knowing the parts helps appreciate the structure.
Definitely. Now, besides the huge hypostyle hall, Karnak is packed with other important structures too, isn't it? Chapels, shrines.
Absolutely. There are some incredibly important smaller structures, like the White Chapel of Sinis Retzred that dates way back to the Middle Kingdom, and a beautiful shrine of Amenhotep II made of calcite, a type of alabaster.
And many of these were found dismantled.
Yes, sadly. Blocks were reused or scattered, but thankfully many have been painstakingly reconstructed in the Karnak Open Air Museum. You can see them there today.
That museum sounds crucial. What about the Festival Hall of Thutmose III, Akhmenu?
Akhmenu. A very unusual and interesting building. Its columns are designed to look like tent poles.
Tent poles? Why?
The thinking is it might commemorate his military campaigns, referencing the royal tent used in the field. It's a unique design.
And it had later uses, too.
Yes, during the Roman or Byzantine era, it was actually converted into a church. You can still see traces of Christian paintings overlaid on the original Egyptian carvings, a real layering of faiths.
Wow. And it housed something important relating to kingship.
It did. A version of the Karnak Table of Kings was found there. This relief showed Thutmose III making offerings to his royal predecessors. It's valuable, though famously it deliberately leaves out Hatshepsut.
The female pharaoh who ruled before him, politics again?
Always politics. And another part of Akhmenu is often called the Botanical Garden.
Why botanical?
Because it features these incredibly detailed carvings of exotic plants and animals that Thutmose III's expeditions supposedly encountered abroad. Part religious space, part natural history record.
Amazing detail. And did this hall also use that clever lighting?
Yes, clerestory lighting wasn't just for the hypostyle hall. Akhmenu used it too, as did another hall called the Wajet Hall, also associated with Thutmose III and Amenhotep II.
So the open-air museum sounds like a must-see part of Karnak, gathering all these reconstructed pieces.
Definitely. It's essential for understanding the full scope and history, preserving these structures that might otherwise be lost.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the incredible buildings, but let's turn to the why. What was Karnak's fundamental religious purpose?
At its absolute core, Karnak was the main earthly home, the primary place of worship for the most important gods of Thebes, the Theban triad.
Which consists of?
The chief god, Amun, often syncretized with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra, his consort, the goddess Mut, and their son, the moon god Khonsu. Karnak was their house.
And being the house of the chief state god Amun, that must have given the priests enormous power.
Immense power. They weren't just religious figures. They managed this vast, wealthy estate, controlled huge resources, and because of their connection to Amun, they wielded significant political and economic influence. Sometimes their power even rivaled the pharaohs.
Wow, so a real power center. And the festivals held here must have been spectacular. You mentioned the Opet Festival.
The Opet was the big one. Annual, lasted for weeks. It involved this incredible procession where the cult statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were taken out of their shrines, placed in sacred boats or barks, and carried ceremonially all the way down that avenue of sphinxes from Karnak to the Luxor Temple.
What was the point of that journey?
It was deeply symbolic. It was about the gods visiting Luxor Temple, but more profoundly, it was about reuniting the divine images, renewing the cosmos, and crucially, reaffirming the divine nature and power of the ruling pharaoh. was essential for kingship.
A massive public spectacle with deep religious and political meaning. Was that the only major festival?
Another key one was the beautiful Festival of the Valley. This involved a procession going the other way, across the Nile to the west bank, towards the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings.
Connecting with the dead pharaohs.
Exactly. Honoring Amun and Mut, but also symbolically linking the living king with his deceased ancestors, reinforcing that unbroken line of divinity and rule. And besides these big events, there were constant daily rituals, purification rites, offerings, the sailing of sacred barks on the lakes we mentioned.
It sounds like a place humming with activity and wealth. The sources mention gold jewelry finds.
Yes, significant finds of gold jewelry underline the immense wealth that flowed into the temple through royal gifts, offerings from the elite, and the temple's own estates.
Of course, a site this ancient must have suffered damage over time.
Inevitably. Millennia take their toll. Earthquakes, floods, invasions, later generations quarrying the stone for their own buildings. It's seen a lot of wear and tear.
The Roman period seems particularly tough on it.
Yes, there was looting, intentional defacement of reliefs. But it's fascinating that even as the old religion faded, the site wasn't entirely abandoned. Around the 4th century AD, as you mentioned with Akhmenu, parts were repurposed. An antechamber in Amenhotep III's court was actually converted into a Christian church.
With Christian paintings put right over the pharaonic reliefs.
Directly on top. Layers of faith, literally one over the other.
One of the most amazing discoveries, though, happened much more recently. In 1903, Georges Legrain.
The Karnak Temple. A truly astonishing find. Legrain was working in the court in front of the 7th pylon, and he discovered this enormous pit.
A pit filled with
Objects. Thousands upon thousands of them. Over 17,000 items eventually recovered statues of kings, gods, private individuals, stelae, bronzes, bits of temple furniture. Just an incredible hoard.
Why bury so much valuable stuff?
That's the big question, isn't it? We still don't know for sure. Was it a ritual, clearing out of the temple, burying sacred objects that were old or damaged but couldn't just be thrown away? Or was it hidden during a time of crisis, an invasion maybe, to protect it? It remains a bit of a mystery. Legrain's team pulled out a huge amount, but the conditions were difficult working below the water table.
So there might even be more down there.
It's possible.
When did Europeans start becoming aware of Karnak again?
Descriptions start appearing from the 16th century onwards. Early travelers, merchants, scholars, they'd visit, make drawings, write accounts. Some were accurate, some less so. But it gradually re-entered European consciousness as this place of wonders.
And there is another important find related to history, the Karnak king list.
Yes, extremely important. It's not a complete list of every single pharaoh, but its value lies in the fact that it includes kings from the first and second intermediate periods, those times of division and instability.
Eras that later, more centralized kingdoms sometimes preferred to ignore or erase from their official histories.
Exactly. So the Karnak list gives us names and confirmation for rulers we might not otherwise know much about.
And its discovery and removal is quite a story in itself.
It is. An Englishman, James Burton, first documented it in 1825. But then, in 1843, a Frenchman, Émile Pristaven, well, he decided France needed it.
He didn't just ask nicely, I take it.
Apparently not. The story goes he secretly chiseled the blocks containing the list off the temple wall, likely at night, and spirited them away. A rather bold, maybe infamous, act of acquisition.
And where is it now?
It ended up in the Louvre Museum in Paris, where you can see it today. Though sadly it was damaged during that rough removal process.
A controversial piece of history about a piece of history. So for visitors today, the main accessible part is that huge precinct of Umara.
That's right. That's the primary area open to the public. And things like the Luxor Pass can be useful if you're planning to visit Karnak, along with other sites in the area. Good practical tip.
Absolutely. Looking back on all this, Karnak really isn't just ruins, is it? It feels more like a library. A library made of stone, holding millennia of history, belief, art, politics.
That's a great way to put it. Every pylon, every column, every faded carving tells a piece of the story, not just of kings and gods, but of architects, engineers, priests, artisans, countless lives over immense stretches of time.
And even with all the study, all the excavation, it feels like there must still be so much hidden, so many mysteries left.
Oh, undoubtedly. The sheer density of the place, the layers upon layers, the potential for more finds like that cachette pit. Karnak continues to reveal secrets, and there's certainly much more we don't yet understand.
So, thinking about all those layers, the additions, the buried artifacts, if you could uncover one more story, one more detail from Karnak's long history, what would you most want to find out?